All right, so we've got this interview with Dr. Gabor Maté to unpack, and wow, his insights on trauma are just incredible. We hear that word trauma so much these days, but like you said, we're going deeper than just basic definitions, right?
Yeah, definitely. Dr. Maté really makes you think about like what we even consider normal, especially in a world where like stress and even trauma are just kind of a given. It's not even just about like pointing out these big traumatic events. It's more about understanding the impact they have on us, like how they affect our bodies, even our minds, even our relationships.
Yeah, totally. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how Dr. Maté talks about trauma as this wound. It's like you don't just get over it. It leaves a mark. It's like a scar.
Yeah.
You might not see on the surface anymore, but it's still there.
Right. There's that rigidity. Yeah.
Exactly. And it can like flare up unexpectedly.
Yeah, totally. And that actually connects directly to why understanding trauma is so important for like even just navigating our relationships, Because Dr. Maté talks about how these unhealed wounds can really drive our reactions, especially with like the people we're closest to. It's like we think we've moved on from something, but then bam, something small happens and it triggers this huge response.
Oh, yeah.
And we're left wondering, where did that come from?
Exactly. It's like our past is like this hidden tripwire in our present moment. So it makes you realize how important it is to actually like address those underlying wounds.
Absolutely. And that's actually where Dr. Maté's insights on vulnerability come in. And now when we hear that word vulnerability, most of us probably think weakness or something negative, right?
Right.
But he kind of flipped the script on that whole idea. He describes it as our capacity to be wounded. So basically, by acknowledging that we can be hurt, that's actually the first step towards like real connection and growth.
Well, that's a good point. So it's not about like trying to be invincible or anything. It's about accepting that we're all capable of being hurt. And that that's actually okay. Like it's part of what allows us to form those genuine bonds with each other.
Exactly.
But then there's this other thing he says, like modern society almost makes vulnerability feel dangerous.
100%. He calls it toxic culture.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so true when you think about it. Like we're constantly being told to be strong, independent, successful,
Right. Be on.
Yes, there's this pressure to always be on, to achieve all the time, to present this like perfect image of ourselves.
And all of that goes against that vulnerability that's so essential for real connection.
Exactly.
It's like we're conditioned to put more importance on external validation than on our own inner needs.
Yes.
And as a result, we end up feeling disconnected, not just from other people, but even from ourselves.
Right. And that disconnect can manifest in so many different ways, everything from anxiety and depression to like struggling in our relationships to just generally feeling unsatisfied with our lives.
Yeah. It's like we're all trying to fit into this mold of what we think we should be instead of just embracing who we truly are.
And that actually, as Dr. Maté points out, that actually starts in childhood.
Right.
The way we're raised, the messages we receive about what's acceptable and what's not, all of that shapes our relationship with vulnerability and authenticity from a really young age.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. One of the things that I found super interesting in this interview was Dr. Maté's perspective on raising resilient kids. And it's not about like shielding them from pain or anything, right? It's about giving them the tools to navigate challenges in a healthy way.
Exactly. He makes this important distinction between what he calls like healthy love versus mollycoddling. So yeah, kids obviously need tons of love and support, but they also need to actually experience the full range of human emotions like joy and sadness, anger, disappointment, all of it.
So trying to protect them from every little bump in the road can actually backfire.
Yeah. When we don't allow kids to experience those like more difficult emotions, they don't learn how to cope with them later on in life.
Makes sense.
It's like Dr. Maté says, the cost of protecting our children from discomfort is that we end up protecting them from life itself.
Wow. That's kind of a tough pill to swallow, but so true. So it's not about creating this perfect pain-free bubble for kids. It's more about providing that safe and supportive environment where they can learn to deal with the ups and downs of being human.
Exactly. And honestly, a huge part of that is validation.
Oh, for sure.
Instead of dismissing their feelings, like telling them to just toughen up or get over it, we need to create space for them to feel heard and understood, even when their emotions feel really big and overwhelming.
Right. It makes me think about something else Dr. Maté talked about, the importance of multi-generational communities, especially for kids. It's like this idea that they need to feel a sense of belonging, not just within their immediate family, but within a wider circle of like elders and mentors.
That's such a good point. And it's something that I feel like we've lost touch with a little bit in our like individualistic culture. Dr. Maté uses this beautiful example of the concept of Ubuntu. from some African cultures, which emphasizes like interconnectedness and collective healing. And the phrase they use is, I am because you are.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
It is.
It really highlights how important it is for kids to feel seen and valued, not just for their achievements, but just for who they are at their core. And that's something that, sadly, I think is lacking in a lot of Western societies today.
Totally. And I think that lack of belonging, that sense of isolation and disconnection, it can have a really big impact on our well-being,
Right.
both individually and as a society. It's like a major contributing factor to that toxic culture that Dr. Maté was talking about.
Okay, so we've talked about trauma as a wound, the importance of vulnerability, and the challenges of like living in this toxic culture. What else did you find insightful about Dr. Maté's perspective?
Well, one of the things that really resonated with me was his analysis of how this toxic culture that we're talking about, it really preys on our like deep-seated need for certainty. He even goes so far as to say that the human ego, the way we see ourselves and like our place in the world, it's essentially a defense mechanism against pain.
So we cling to certainty even when it's actually hurting us.
Exactly. We like grasp onto those external markers of identity, like our jobs, our possessions, our social status,
Right.
because they give us this false sense of control and security in a world that often feels really chaotic and unpredictable.
Right. We become so attached to those things even when they're not actually making us happy.
Right.
It's like we'd rather have that comfort of the familiar, even if it's painful, than face the uncertainty, the unknown.
100%. And that fear of the unknown, that fear of being vulnerable, of stepping outside of our comfort zones, that's what keeps us stuck in these unhealthy patterns. And it really limits our capacity for growth and connection.
So true.
Yeah.
So how do we break free then? Dr. Maté uses this example of professional sports, like this thing that's supposed to be a game, a form of play. It becomes this high-stakes battle where winning and losing take on this like life or death significance.
Right. And he says that in that process, we actually lose sight of the things that really matter, like genuine human connection, compassion. It becomes all about winning, about proving our worth through external validation.
And in the process, we forget to cultivate the things that actually bring us true and lasting fulfillment.
Yeah. And it's like we forget what actually makes us feel good,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because that's exactly what Dr. Maté says we need to do. Like step off that treadmill of always needing external validation and reconnect with who we really are.
Right. Way easier said than done, though.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because we're constantly bombarded with these messages about who we should be, what we should be striving for. So like, how do we even begin to untangle ourselves from all of that?
Well, Dr. Maté suggests that maybe we need to look beyond our own cultural norms, and find inspiration from some of those ancient traditions that really prioritize things like connection community, a deep respect for nature. Like he argues that these traditions, they offer really valuable insights into what it really means to be human.
That's fascinating. So we've kind of lost touch with some of those more fundamental truths about our own nature.
Totally. And he talks about how in many indigenous cultures, for example, elders are really revered for their wisdom and their experience. They're seen as these like living libraries of knowledge, these vital links to the past and guides for the future.
Which is so different from our culture, where it's all about youth and productivity. It's almost like aging is seen as this liability, like a sign of decline, instead of this process of growth and wisdom.
Yeah, it's a completely different perspective. And I think it goes back to that sense of fragmentation we were talking about earlier, that disconnect from ourselves, from each other, even from the natural world.
It makes you wonder how much of the suffering we see today is coming from that fragmentation, that lack of genuine connection and belonging.
Totally. And that's where Dr. Maté challenges us to question some of our most basic beliefs about human nature. Like, he pushes back against this idea that we're all inherently selfish and competitive.
Yeah.
He says that kindness and cooperation are just as much a part of our biological makeup as anything else.
Oh, that's so interesting. It is like we tend to focus on all the negative aspects of being human and forget about that incredible capacity we have for empathy, compassion, and love.
Exactly. He uses this example that I just love. He says we never excuse acts of like compassion or generosity by saying, oh, well, it's just human nature, right?
Right.
But we use that phrase all the time to justify selfish or destructive behavior.
It's so true.
Like we're so quick to attribute negative behavior to our inherent nature, but we don't do the same thing for our positive qualities.
That's a really good point.
It's like this subtle bias, but it speaks volumes about how we view ourselves and how we view each other. And it connects directly to what Dr. Maté calls the myth of normal, this idea that the way our society functions now, with all the emphasis on individualism competition, the need for more, like as if that's just natural or inevitable.
Right, like it's the only way,
Yeah, but it's actually a pretty recent construct. And as he points out, it's causing a lot of harm.
both to individuals and to the planet.
Exactly. And look, he's not saying that competition or ambition are bad in and of themselves, but he's asking us to just consider the possibility that maybe there's a healthier, a more sustainable way to live, one that prioritizes cooperation, compassion, and a deeper sense of interconnectedness.
So it's really about questioning those assumptions we have about what it means to be successful, to be happy, even just to be human.
Yes. And that questioning, that willingness to challenge the status quo, that's often where real growth and transformation can begin. It's about recognizing that we don't have to just accept things as they are. You know, we have the power to create a different reality, both for ourselves and for future generations.
But that takes courage,
Yeah.
right? That willingness to embrace vulnerability, to step outside of our comfort zones and challenge those really deep-seated patterns of thinking and behaving.
Totally. And I get it. It can feel scary. It's so much easier to just stick with what we know, even if it's not working for us. But the truth is, sometimes the greatest rewards in life are waiting for us just outside of our comfort zones.
So how do we do that? How do we cultivate that kind of courage and resilience, especially in a world that feels so chaotic and unpredictable?
Well, Dr. Maté talks a lot about the importance of self-compassion. He says that we can't really heal if we're constantly judging ourselves and criticizing ourselves for not being good enough or strong enough or successful enough.
So it's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a close friend or a loved one.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress. You know, we all make mistakes. And actually, those imperfections, those are the things that make us human.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Reminds me of something else he said about authenticity, about being true to ourselves even when it's hard or uncomfortable.
And that authenticity, that willingness to embrace who we truly are, flaws, and that's what allows us to connect with other people on a deeper level. Because when we show up as our true selves, we give other people permission to do the same.
It's like creating a space where vulnerability is not something to be afraid of, but something to be welcomed and celebrated.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a beautiful thing to strive for, to cultivate a world where we can all feel free to be our authentic selves, where we feel seen and heard and valued for who we are rather than for what we do or what we achieve.
It all circles back to that sense of belonging, doesn't it? That fundamental human need to feel connected to something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this intricate web of life, interconnected in ways that we might not even fully grasp, and that our own well-being is completely intertwined with the well-being of the collective.
So it's not just about healing ourselves, it's about healing the world around us.
Exactly. And that healing, as Dr. Maté says, it begins with each of us making a conscious effort to cultivate more awareness, more compassion, and more connection in our own lives.
Which can feel daunting, but it's also incredibly empowering,
Yeah.
right? This idea that we each have the power to make a difference, simply by choosing to show up in the world with more authenticity, more kindness, more compassion.
Absolutely. And it's true what they say about the ripple effect, you know? Like, even small acts of kindness, those moments of genuine connection, they create these waves of healing that extend far beyond ourselves.
It's wild when you think about it. So much of what Dr. Maté talked about seems to revolve around this tension we all experience.
Yeah.
The tension between wanting certainty and the reality that being human means embracing uncertainty.
Right. It's like this paradox. He actually laughed when someone asked him for a single law that everyone should live by. He said just the act of trying to impose any one rule would create resistance and defeat the purpose.
I love that.
Right.
Because it highlights how much we suffer when we're trying to control things that are inherently outside of our control.
Exactly. It's about learning to embrace the unknown, to find peace in the midst of all the chaos, and to trust that even when things feel uncertain, we're exactly where we're supposed to be.
Okay, so that's a really comforting thought, especially these days when everything feels so overwhelming and unpredictable.
For sure. It's about shifting our mindset, you know, from this idea of needing to fix ourselves to one of curiosity and self-compassion, like approaching life with all of its messy complexities, with a sense of openness and a willingness to just learn.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into Dr. Maté's work, is there like one key takeaway that you think would be particularly helpful for our listeners to really hold on to?
You know, I think the most important message is that healing is possible. It might not be easy and it might not look the way we expect it to, but that capacity for growth, for connection, for authentic joy, it's within all of us.
It's about remembering that we're not alone in this journey. There's so many other people out there who are also navigating the complexities of trauma, of healing, of trying to find meaning, the world that often feels at odds with our deepest needs.
Yes. And maybe the most revolutionary thing we can do in this day and age is to simply be ourselves, to embrace our vulnerability, to be kind to ourselves and to others, and to just keep showing up for this messy, beautiful journey of being human.
It's almost like he's saying that by searching for these rigid answers, we might actually miss out on those deeper truths, the ones you can only really find through experience. You know,
Yeah, like sometimes you just have to live it. It's about embracing that paradox of being human, that tension between wanting to know for sure and the reality that life is full of surprises. And you know what? It's often in those moments of uncertainty when we let go of needing to control everything that we actually grow the most.
it's true. Letting go of that control can be so freeing.
It really
It's
can.
like surrendering to how things unfold, trusting that even when it doesn't make sense, we're being guided towards something meaningful.
Yes. And that surrender, that willingness to just let go of our expectations and be open to whatever happens, that's often where we discover our greatest strengths and our deepest connections.
It's like that quote, what you seek is seeking you. Sometimes you just have to get out of your own way.
Oh, I love that. And that feeling of being found, of coming home to yourself, that's what Dr. Maté talks about as true freedom. And it's not about escaping from the world or pretending that challenges don't exist. It's about cultivating that deep sense of peace and acceptance no matter what's happening around you.
So it's about recognizing that we are already worthy, just as we are. Our worth doesn't come from achievements or what other people think.
Exactly. We're already complete. It's about embracing all of ourselves, the good and the bad, the light and the shadow, our successes and our failures, all of it. It's those experiences that make us who we are.
Yeah, and that's a really powerful message, especially in a world that tells us we need to be fixed or improved.
We're not enough.
Yeah.
But the truth is we're all perfectly imperfect. And those
Right.
imperfections are what make us beautiful and unique.
This deep dive has been amazing. Dr. Mate's work is really thought-provoking, but also hopeful. It's like he's encouraging all of us to look inward, to question our assumptions, and to embrace every part of who we are.
And maybe the biggest takeaway is that healing is a journey. It's not this destination that we arrive at. It's a lifelong process of growth and self-discovery and connection.
That's ongoing.
Yes. And the more we can embrace vulnerability and compassion both within ourselves and in our interactions with the world, the closer we get to this collective healing of humanity and the planet.
What a beautiful way to end this conversation. It's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more compassionate and connected world. So to everyone listening, take a moment to reflect on everything we've talked about today and how you can bring these insights into your own life. Until next time.